Okay, so we are sitting here at the last night of Shiva for Leon Bennett, our beloved reader in this Shiur, and this Shiur should be Le'ilui Nishmat, for an elevation for the soul of Aryeh Shmuel ben Shlomo, Leon Samuel Bennett. So as I suppose fortune would have it, we happen to be at the point in our Tanakh Shiur when we stopped before the Chagim at a very appropriate point, because we're just at the beginning of a story that you will all know. Okay, everybody will know this story that we are about to learn in some detail. And you'll have known it for many, many years. And we're about to start, and this is just where we left off, having been doing this Shiur for many years now, and Leon was there right at the beginning. We left off right at the beginning of the story of David and Goliath. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about in some detail tonight, the story of David and Goliath. Those of you who have been with us on our Shul Tiolim may remember that we actually went to the place where you look down into the valley, where the story and the fight between David and Goliath took place. And that's at a place called Tel Azakah. It's near Bet Shemesh, and it looks over down into the valley. And in the valley there, you can imagine there's two sides, two hills. On one hill were the Philistine troops, on the other hill were the Israelite troops, and down in the valley, that's where the battle took place between David and Goliath. And the Tanakh, we're in chapter 17 of Shmuel Aleph, and it begins by setting the scene. And the Philistines gathered their camps for war. And they gathered at this place called Socha, Asheli Yehuda, which was in the territory of Judah. And they camped between this place, Socha and Azekah, hence the name of the hill where we stood to look down over. It's called Tel. Tel means a hill, like Tel Aviv means a hill of spring. Tel Azekah was the hill of Azekah, exactly where the Tanakh tells it where it took place. The Shaul and King Saul, the Ish Yisrael and the Israelite men, Ne'esfu, they gathered, they gathered and they camped on the other side of the valley of Elah. And the two camps were approaching one another for war. Okay, Uplishtim ondim el hahar mizeh. I nearly said Palestinians, and that would have been a Freudian slip, wouldn't it? The Philistines were on one side, the Yisrael ondim al hahar mizeh, and the Israelites were on the other side, the Haggai beinehem, and the valley was between them. And then, all of a sudden, vayetze ish haybeinayim mimachanot plishtim. And there came out from the Philistine camp, Ish Habeinayim, means a champion. That's how it's translated here in the Steinsaltz translation. What have you got there? Champion. A champion came out from Plishtim. He was like, their best soldier. And his name was Goliath in Hebrew. Goliath. Shmuel. Goliath was his name. And where was he from? Anybody know where he was from? Gath. That's right. Goliath of Gath. Gat in Hebrew. Migat. He was from Gat. Now, this is the interesting part. Gavohu, his height was, anybody know without looking in? How tall was he? Anyone know?
More than 2 meters.
How many?
2.5 to 3.
Okay, Ellie says 2.5 meters. More than 2 meters, says Jeffrey. 3.4, any advance? Oh, 2.4, okay. What does the Tanakh tell us? He was 1.5 and a span. 6 cubits and a span. Okay, what's a cubit? What's an amma? Yes, Jeffrey is right. An amma is the distance from the point of the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. Okay, that is called an amma. Okay, that is called an amma. Now, of course, that depends on how tall you are. If you are, a fellow with, a bit like a monkey with long arms, right? Like my fourth son, whose jacket I borrowed and his sleeves come down here. The amma is quite long, but the average amma is 17 inches. Okay, let's call it 18 because it's easy to work out. 1.5 feet is an amma. So 6 amot would be 9 feet. Okay, 9 feet and a zerish, which is a span. A span is 5 fingers or a quarter of an amma. So 6.25 amot is 9 foot 4 inches, according to Tanakh. 9 foot 4 inches. Okay, that's how tall he was according to the Tanakh, the Masoretic text. Okay, what's the Masoretic text? The text that we've had handed down from Sinai, from Moshe to Yoshua to the Zakanim to all the way down to us. 6.5 cubits. Okay, 9 foot 4 inches. Now, who knows who was the tallest person in the Guinness Book of Records, the tallest recorded person in the Guinness Book of Records? Anybody know? Probably an American. Yeah, they're all tall. They're all big fellas. Look at Aaron there. His name, I don't know whether he was American. He was a chap. I think he probably was. Robert Wadlow was his name. And how tall was he? The tallest ever recorded man in the Guinness Book of Records. 8 feet something. Yeah, almost 9 feet. He was 8 feet 11 inches. Okay. So according to our Masoretic text, Goliath was taller than the tallest man ever, but not by much. So it's not like ridiculous. There's a midrash that says that Moshe Rabbeinu was 20 amot tall, which would make him what, 60 feet or 30 feet or something ridiculous. No, he wasn't. And that's a midrash. It doesn't mean that. It means that he was a man of great stature. But here, this is not beyond the realms of possibility that they had this guy. I mean, what was Robert? By the way, I read up about Robert Wadlow. It was very interesting. He died aged 22. And according to his skeletal survey, he was still growing, right? So it's likely that had he lived longer, he would have reached the height of Goliath. So the reason I'm telling you that is that it's not mad to think, or it's not necessarily exaggerated to think that Goliath was actually 6.5 cubits, which would make him 9.5 feet. What was the condition that Robert Wadlow had that made him grow so much? There was a fella in Sale that had it as well. Remember? Richard Cream. Yeah.
I prefer
Yeah, that's right. It's gigantism is its common name, but it's a pituitary problem. It's an excessive growth hormone, and they carry on growing, and they grow very fast. And they don't usually live full lifespan, as did Robert Wadlow, because their frame is too heavy, and they have heart problems and they die young. But it's very likely that Goliath was somebody who suffered from this condition and was a very, very big fellow. We see big fellows, don't we? We see basketball players who are 7'6", 8", and what do? They make a career out of their height. Today, if you're that tall, you make a career out of going and playing in the NBA, and you make millions of dollars, right? If you're a very tall fellow. In those days, if you were a big fella like Goliath, they didn't have the NBA. So what did you do? You became the champion. You became the best soldier. You became the biggest fighter. You muscled up, and that's what he did. He was their champion, right? He was there, and that's what it says. Ishmael 9. He was the champion. Now, I stressed to you before that this is what the Masoretic text tells us. Anybody know what the Septuagint is? Correct. It's the Greek translation of the Torah. And why is it called the Septuagint? Septuagint means 70. Why is it called the Septuagint?
Because 70 people are being separated and they have to translate. All of them translate the Torah in the same way, in the same thing.
Exactly. So the Greeks decided that they wanted to check out this Torah business, and they took 70 scholars and they separated them. And they said that each of them had to translate into Greek the Torah. It was 70 Jewish scholars, and they had to translate it into Greek. And the rabbis tell us that they all translated it in exactly the same way, even down to the mistakes that they made deliberately. There were certain things that they put in that they all decided that they better change because it wasn't very complimentary about the Greeks or other sorts of things, and they sort of schmuckled a bit with the thing, and they all did the same schmuckle, all 70 of them. And that became known as the Septuagint. Now, what's interesting is, in the Septuagint, which is of which there's the modern translations, some modern translations are based upon, it doesn't say that he was 6.5 cubits. It says he was 4.5 cubits. Okay, 4.5 cubits, which makes him and a span, which makes him about 6'9". Now that's certainly well within the range of it's an outlier, but it's certainly well within the range of sort of normality. Now, so how come the Septuagint says 4.5 and the Masoretic text that we have as 6.5? Now, just to make the question even more difficult, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written around about the turn of the era, around about the turn of the era when it went from the current era from BCE to CE, so about 2,000 years ago, and they were found, of course, in the middle of the 20th century in Qumran. These scrolls are the oldest existing copy of Shmuel Aleph, of our Sefer Shmuel Aleph. And what do you think it says in there? Who thinks it says 6.5 cubits in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Hands up. Who thinks it says 4.5? I think it says 4.5 because I know. I looked it up. It says 4.5. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, how the Dead Sea Scrolls have got 4.5, the Septuagint's got 4.5, and our Masoretic text has got 6.5 amot. Does it really matter? No, it doesn't. It's just a fascinating piece of and that's, of course, those of you who are new to our Shiur, Julia, of course, is used to our nonsense, and we always find some kind of irrelevancy to get excited about. Now, so let's assume that he's somewhere between 6'9" and 9'4". Okay, somewhere between 4.5 and 6.5. How tall was King David?
He was only a boy.
Okay, he was only a boy. That is true. How old was he? Well, he can't have been such a young boy because we have already been told that he'd been killing lions and bears by then.
Below married to Goliath. He was under 18.
He was probably under 18 because he wasn't yet married, but he was of marriageable age because he's about to get Michal as a reward for. I don't want to spoil the story, but actually David beats Goliath. Okay, it's a bit of a spoiler. Sorry if I've just spoiled the story for you. So yeah, he was a young man. He was a young shepherd. So he was probably somewhere between 15 and 18. Okay, but how tall was he? Does Tanakh tell us how tall he was? Tells us how tall Goliath was. Doesn't tell us how tall David was.
Historically, people were much smaller anyway.
Okay, very good. And how tall was the average man what time period are we talking about? When did King David live?
There's 1,000 years before.
Correct, 1000 BCE, so 3,000 years ago.
How much is imitation?
What was the average height of a man 3,000 years ago? Jeffrey says 5 feet. Any Julia's agreeing? Anyone else? Well, according to my research, the average was somewhere between 5'3" and 5'5". Okay, so that would have been the average. Now let's assume David's a young man. He's not quite yet reached his full growth height. So he was probably about 5 feet. So even if we take the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls figure of 4.5 amot, which makes him 6'9". Okay, so is anybody here that doesn't work in feet apart from Ellie? Right, feet and inches. We're all imperialists, aren't we? So if we take the come on in, don't be shy. So if we take the average height, and David Amelech is probably a little bit shorter than that because he was only a youngster, 5 foot versus at least 6'9", possibly up to 9 foot. You can see that the idea that we have of David and Goliath, the tiny underdog against the massive champion, is not an exaggeration. Okay, and if that isn't enough, let's just have a look at what Goliath was wearing, because the Tanakh tells us what he was wearing. V'kova nechoshet al rosho. He had a copper kova. What's a kova? Yeah, modern Hebrew is the same word, kova. He had a helmet. He had a copper helmet. V'shirion kashim. What's shirion? Who's served in the Israeli army? What's shirion? What's shirion? Armor. That's right. The Shirion corps, or the tank, is the tank corps. Okay, one of my children served in Shirion. Shirion is the tanks, because Shirion means armor. Well, when you're in a tank, you're surrounded by this metal thing. So Shirion kashim. What's kashim? Think of your fish. I beg your pardon. Kaskasim. What's kaskasim? Yes, you have it on fish. Scales, right? The scales on a fish are kaskasim. Think about armor. Think about chain armor, that it was done in like scales of a fish. This is what he had on. So, kova nechoshet al rosho, a copper helmet, and he had this armor, this scaly armor. Umishkala shirion, the weight of his armor, 5,000 shkalim nechoshet, 5,000 shekels of weight of copper. Now, I worked all this out for you. 5,000 shekels of weight. A shekel is 8.5 grams. Okay, that is the shekel of here, weighed 8.5 grams. He had armor on that was 5,000 shekels. Now, I'll save you the maths because I've done it for you. It was 40 kilograms. So his armor weighed 40 kilograms. Okay. Umitzchat nechoshet al raglav. And he had this mitzchat nechoshet al raglav. What's metzach in Hebrew? A forehead, that's right. But he had copper foreheads al raglav, on his feet. What's that mean? Or on his legs? What did that mean? How can he have his foreheads on his legs? Huh?
Yeah.
That's right. He had what we would call in England shin pads, right? He had shin pads made of copper. Okay. Nechoshet is copper.
Copper. Nechoshet is copper.
Nechoshet is copper.
No, bronze is different.
So traditionally Nechoshet is copper. I mean, if you look in the Torah, the Shiur, the lava, the basin that was in the Beit HaMikdash was made of Nechoshet, it's copper. Maybe in Tanakh Nechoshet here means brass, or maybe it means bronze. I don't know. But But anyway, whatever. It's nachoshet. It's some kind of metal. We'll go with copper for the time being. Anyway, what's this metzach, which means forehead? What's his forehead doing on his legs? He's got shin pads on, right? They're called. He's translated. There's an old-fashioned translation in here, which I taught to my grandson last week because we were learning this. Not last week, just before the Chagim. I was learning the story of David and Goliath with my grandson in Australia, and he's big into football. And I said to him, "Look, Goliath had these copper shin pads," and I told him the word that is translated in here. Anybody heard the word greaves? Not Jimmy. Greaves, Greaves, apart from being an excellent footballer from the 1960s and 70s, who Leon, I'm sure, would have known. Even Beverly knows the name. Greaves are an old-fashioned name for shin pads. So it doesn't answer my question. That's just another bit of rubbish that I've told you. Why is this metzach, the forehead? What is a metzach got to do with the shin pads? Lynn? Okay, maybe your forehead is a hard place. Could be. I think the answer is that we need to go back to the Bet HaMikdash. What did the Kohen Gadol have on here? He had a tzitz. He had the tzitz, which was a metal plate, and on the tzitz it had two words: Kodesh Lashem, holy to Hashem. So this was a metal plate that was on his forehead. It was tzitz. It was a golden plate. So I think that this idea of mitzchat here is from the word metzach. It's from the idea that there was a covering there over the forehead and the Torah, and it came to mean a covering. So he had these pads of copper on him. They were basically another form of armor. He had chidon nechoshet bein ktefav. And he had a chidon. What's a chidon? What's the chidon? Is that not kind of a spear? Javelin, yes. Okay, a javelin. Thank you. A bronze. It says bronze here as well, actually. A bronze javelin on his shoulder. Now, on the top of his spear, the chetz chanito, on the top of his spear, he had a head, a metal head of barzel. What's barzel? Iron. So his spear had an iron head. And how much did his iron spear head, just the head, not the shaft, how much did that weigh, do you think? How many, Michael? 600 shkalim, which was 5 kilograms, right? The size of a big bag of potatoes, right? You used to get 5 kilogram bags of potatoes. Yeah, and that's just the head of the spear. So not only is he 9'4" or even 6'9", he's armed up to he's armored up to the hilt. He's got 40 kilograms of chainmail. It's amazing that he could even walk. 40 kilograms of chainmail. He's got these metal, these bronze or copper or whatever they were, shin pads that must have weighed a fair bit too. And he's got a spear, the head of which is made of iron, and the head alone weighs 5 kilograms. So we've got this picture now, haven't we, in our minds of this. Remember, we're spoiled because we all know the story, right? We've seen the cartoons or we've seen we've seen stories, we've read stories. But imagine you're reading Tanakh for the first time. You never heard this story before. Can you imagine how this must? And you don't know the end of the story. You don't know that David's going to come up with this little slingshot, whack him in the head. All you know is that there's this champion who's like, a giant of a fellow with all this armor. It can only end one way, can't it? This is not going to end well. It's very difficult for us to look at this with fresh eyes. But if you try and imagine that just for a minute, you can see how the Tanakh is building up this idea. And then what happened? Let's have a look. Where am I? Okay. So Vayamod, and he stood there. Vayikra el ma'archot Yisrael, and he called out to the Israelite camp. Vayom alehem, and he said to them, this is Goliath. He stood there. Imagine the scene of the troops amassed either side of the valley. Goliath comes to the front of the Philistine troops and he says like this, and he says to them, why should we bother going to war? Apparently, that was something that they did quite often in the ancient Near East. And that was when the armies were fairly evenly matched, thank you, fairly evenly matched. They would actually do this idea of the two, each one would bring their champion and they would have a duel, they would have a fight, and whoever won, whoever lost, their people would be slaves to the other nation, and that would avoid all the bloodshed and all the killing that would go on. There would just be one killing, right? The one champion would beat the other champion, and the loser would be, their people would be slaves to the winner's nation, and that was an accepted method of warfare. So he says, why should we go out to war? Hello, Anochi Aplishti. Look, he says, I'm a Philistine. I was once called a Philistine, by the way. We have a different meaning altogether today for a Philistine, but fortunately my parents didn't know what it meant, because I once got on my school report, Jonathan has been determined to maintain a position of Philistinism throughout the year. And my father said to me, what's that? I said, it means I was a very good student. Anyway, so he says, Goliath says, Anochi Aplishti, I'm a Philistine. Va'atem avadim l'Shaul. You are servants to Shaul. You are servants to King Shaul. Now that's a strange thing to say, isn't it? Why did the Tanakh tell us that the Plishti giant, the Plishti champion, said to the Israelites, he didn't say, I'm a servant of the Plishtim and you're servants of Shaul. I'm a Plishti. Presumably I'm a free man. But you lot are all servants to Shaul. You are avadim, slaves to Shaul. Brulachem ish ve'yered elai. Choose for yourself a man and let him come down to me. So, anyone got any suggestions as to why he's taunting them? That's right. He's taunting them. And in fact, we'll see it in a little while that they recognize, the Israelites recognize that he is taunting them. And David himself says, we'll see a little bit later on if we get to it, David says, we can't allow this man to taunt God. Now he's taunting the Israelites. David, in a way, is saying many things that we say today, and that is, we are representatives of God, are we not? We all say when we see somebody who looks like a, who looks like a Jew, especially if he looks like a religious Jew and he behaves badly, what do we say? Chilul Hashem. Because in some ways, like it or not, we are representing the Almighty. David felt that. David felt that this Plishti, this Goliath, this giant of a man was taunting not just the Bnei Israel and not just Shaul the king, but actually the king with a capital K. He was taunting God, and David was not prepared to stand for that, and we'll see that. So he says, if your fellow will overcome me, we will be slaves to you. And if I will overcome him, and I will smite him, you will be slaves to us, and you will serve us. And then and what happens is everyone's scared. Look at the state of him. He's 6'9", 9'4". He's got all this armor on. By the way, the other thing about these people with gigantism, with this condition of acromegaly, is they're all particularly ugly because their face, their jaw grows disproportionately to the rest of their face. So they have a think about Jaws from the Bond films, yeah. He had acromegaly. Desperate Dan, big long jaw. They were ugly people, right? So there you've got this enormous, ugly brute, right? Who's armed up to their teeth, and they're all 5'3" at the most. These people, and they're looking at them thinking, "Yeah, of course we're going to come out and fight you. Yeah, what a great idea." They're all scared. So and so he's taunting them, and so nobody goes. Nobody goes. They all stood there like stillers. And so he says, but then he carries on. He says, "Vayoma haplishti," and the Philistine said, "Ani cherafti et marachot Yisrael hayom hazeh." From the word cherpa. What does cherpa mean?
Shame.
Shame. I'm putting you to shame. What's the matter with you people? He says. Where are you? You're shameful. Can't you even find one person who's willing to come and fight me? No, of course they couldn't, but he's taunting them even further. Tanuli ish, give me a man. Come on, send me somebody. Come on, bring it on, and we'll fight together. Okay. Now, let me ask you this question. Those of you who have been in the Shiur should know the answer to this question. Who was the tallest man in Israel at that time?
Shaul.
King Saul. Very good, Julia. Julia was listening. Julia's been listening all the while. When King Saul was crowned as king, one of the things that we're told, and at the time we wondered, why are we being told that he was head and shoulders taller than anybody else? That's what the Psukim say. That's, by the way, where that expression comes from. Head and shoulders taller than anybody else. The Torah, Tanakh, tells us that King Shaul was head and shoulders taller than anyone else. So he was the tallest person in Israel. So who is the obvious person who should go forth and battle with Goliath? King Saul. And does he go?
No.
Next pasuk. Vayishma Shaul v'chol Yisrael, and Shaul and all of Israel heard et divrei hapelishti ha'ela, these words of this Philistine. Vayechatu vayiru ma'od, they were very frightened. Shaul as well, he was frightened. He was frightened. Now, at this point, we just need to ask a question. Why was Shaul frightened? Why did Shaul not have in his mind that he is the king of Israel? Israel has as its God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's had miraculous victories in the past where he's not had to lift a finger. Why did he not trust that God would be with him in this fight? Why did he have to leave it to the little schnip, David, who's a little shepherd boy, to come forward? Why did Shaul not go forward himself? Where was his courage? Where was his emunah? Where was his belief in God? Exactly. The previous chapter, those of you who have not been with us will not have known that in the end of the previous chapter, we see that Shmuel, the prophet Shmuel, says to Shaul that God has taken away the kingdom from you. And then more importantly, we're told that the Spirit of God that had been on Shaul left him. And what kind of spirit came instead, we're told? A spirit of melancholy, depression. So at this point, Shaul has no longer got the Spirit of God in him. But who has got the Spirit of God in him at this point? David. I'm going back to chapter 16, verse 13. You have to now imagine that Leon, bless him, is reading this. It's not going to be the same with me reading it, but this is what he would have said. He would have said, Samuel took the horn of oil and he anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rested upon David from that day onward. Samuel rose and went to his home in Ramah. So at this point, the Spirit of God has left Shaul. Shaul is depressed. He's got a spirit of depression upon him. Ruach Ra, that's how it's Ruach Ra, an evil spirit descended upon Shaul. But the Spirit of Hashem, Vatitzlach, what word can you hear in the middle of that? Vatitzlach. Hatzlacha. Hatzlacha. Vatitzlach Ruach Hashem. The Spirit of Hashem successfully came upon David, meaning that David was imbued with a spirit of success from God. Yes, Nachum. We're not told that. We're only told that Tzlach Ruach Hashem al David. The army was there. It seems that it's not obvious. It was there because we know what's going to happen next. But it was. We're not told about it. It's a good point. We're only told in the previous chapter, Vatitzlach Ruach Hashem el David me hayom hahu Ramallah. And from that day onwards, which was prior to this episode, the Spirit of God rested on David. So we're going to stop very shortly, and we're just going to finish this bit. So we've got to the point here. Goliath, this enormous, ugly brute who's armed up to the teeth, is taunting the Bnei Israel. Shaul, who really should be the one to step up, because not only is he the king, he's also the tallest, he's also the biggest, and he's presumably therefore the one most suited to fight Goliath. He's in a state of depression. If you look, we're not going to go into this now because we've no time, but if you look carefully, you can see the descent of Shaul into his shell. 2 battles ago, he was at the forefront. 1 battle ago against the Plishtim, he was just behind the forefront, and he left it to his son Yehonatan to do the spade work, as it were. But he was still there in the background, and then he came in afterwards. By the time this 3rd battle comes, he's already descended into this depression, and he is paralyzed with depression. He's paralyzed with fear. He's paralyzed with depression, and he's not stepping up. And then what happens? We'll just set the scene and leave you on a cliffhanger because you don't know the story, and that'll make you want to join the next shiur. The next pasuk says, "V'David ben ish Ephrati hazer mi Beit Lechem Yehuda," and David, who was the son of a man from Ephrat near Beit Lechem in the territory of Judah, Ushmo Yishai, and his name was Yishai. David's father was named Yishai. Velo, with a vav, Shmona Vanim, and he had 8 sons. Now we had a shiur a few weeks ago, didn't we, where we talked about how many sons he had, whether it's 7 or whether it was 8. Here it says it was 8, and then David now comes on the scene. We already know David a little from the previous chapter where he was anointed by Shmuel, but in private. The previous chapter was Shmuel goes to the house of Yishai. God says to him, one of Yishai's sons is going to be the next king. And he goes, it was, it's like a lottery. Bring out the first one. And Shmuel thought it was him because he was very tall and very handsome and God says, no, it's not him. Next one, no, it's not him. And he goes through 7 sons, and God says, no, it's not him. And Shmuel says, well, that's it, there aren't any more. And he says to Yishai, have you got any other sons? And Yishai says, yeah, I've got the little Schnip. He's out with the sheep, but it won't be it. He's like the little runt of the litter. Anyway, so they go and get David, and God says to Shmuel, yeah, that's the one. That's the one. He's the one. Go and anoint him. So David is anointed as king, but in private. Nobody knows about it. The only people that knows about it is Yishai and presumably his sons who are still there, and David. And from that moment, that's when we're told that it's Tzlach Ruach Hashem el David. That's when we're told that David gets the Spirit, but nobody else knows. The Tanakh now introduces the rest of the world to David by telling us that he was the youngest son of Yishai. We already know that because we were a fly on the wall when Shmuel did this anointing, but nobody else was there. So we had that privileged bit of information. So now we're going to be introduced to David and how David came to be at the battlefront. What's he doing there? Because he's a shepherd. He should be with his father's sheep. And he's not, as Jeffrey said, he's only a youth. He's not actually of military age yet. So we're going to stop there because I've used up all my time. Again, we can only say that Leon's presence is felt here tonight at this Shiur, and his presence will be felt forevermore in our Shiurim because he really was an absolute integral part of the Shiurim. And as I said to you at the Levaya, the Gemara Shiur, which is on a Wednesday morning, is entirely in his merits because it was his idea. He asked me to do it, and I was a bit reluctant, if I'm really honest, for everybody else to join him because he really wanted to do it on his own. But he was gracious as always and said, yes, that's a good idea. We'll invite everybody else to come. And I think in the end, he enjoyed that. But every single minute of that Shiur that we've done up till now and that we will do in the future is in Leon's merit. And that is the most enormous merit that he takes with him into the next world. And we will miss him tremendously, as of course will Beverly, Carol, and the rest of the family. We all feel like family because Leon was so beloved to us. So Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be a blessing. Ari Leib Shmuel ben Shlomo Zichrono Livracha. You found it yet, Wendy? Did you find it?